Islam my deen, Allah my Lord, His word Quran, Muhammad Prophet, praise be upon him. I'm a Muslim for all of time.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا وبعد. In the name of Allah, the most merciful, the especially merciful, we praise Allah Azza wa Jal, for He is deserving of all praise and recognition. We invoke the peace and the blessings of Allah upon the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, upon his family, his companions, and upon you and I, and all those who follow in their path until Allah Azza wa Jal inherits this earth and everything on it. Then Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear viewers, I welcome you again to this program that we have embarked on discussing or explaining really some of the common concepts in Islamic teachings. And we touched upon a few and repeated some concepts that might be related to others, and really the entirety of these concepts are interwoven together to make this one unit known as the Deen of Islam. But there is specificity for each of these, as there is a general understanding of these common concepts. There's also a specific understanding for these concepts that further enriches one's understanding and how they should comprehend these meanings properly. Today we'll discuss or explain the concept of charity in Islam. The concept of charity of Islam really relates to two types. There are two types of charity. We know that charity is given the title of zakat and sadaqah. And zakat can be also used to explain or to express the charity that is voluntary. And it also expresses the charity that's mandatory. And in the Quran, Allah Azza wa Jal mentions وَآتَوُا الزَّكَاةِ many times. أَقَامُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتَوُوا الزَّكَاةِ, to the extent that many of the commentators of the Quran say that zakat is the sister of salat. That every time salah, most of the time when salah is mentioned, zakat comes right after that. And we know that even Isa alayhi salam, prior prophets and messengers, they were known to have made this statement, as Allah reveals to us in the Quran, وَأَوْصَانِي بِالصَّلَاةِ وَالزَّكَاةِ مَا دُمْتُ حَيًّا. When in the sequence of the verses in Surah Maryam, Isa alayhi salam is, it's revealed that he said, and Allah has commanded me to perform salah and zakat. Zakat here, the general meaning of it being purification. Part of the purification is to give in the sake of Allah or in the way of Allah. So we find this a very important concept that is repeated in many of the sources of Islam, the Quran and the Sunnah, and well elaborated upon through the derivatives of these scholars. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ mentions that it's the third pillar of Islam, hence coming after Salah. Again, even in the Sunnah, the Prophet mentions it after the second pillar of Islam. We know that the first pillar is the testimony of the oneness of Allah, shahadatu an la ilaha illallah wa anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, and that the messenger is his and the Prophet Muhammad is his messenger. And then number two pillar is Salah, and then number three pillar after Salah is Zakah. And of course fasting is 4, and Hajj or pilgrimage is 5. Here we understand that it's well established, it's a pillar in Islam. But let's go further into the concept of sadaqah, zakat as being sadaqah. This is the concept that we're talking about, charity. Sadaqah really is, again, a comprehensive understanding of the word of charity. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ even describes one smiling in the face of another person is an act of charity. That when you smile, you give this good expression and comforting expression to your brother or your sister, you're actually giving charity. But it's a more spiritual kind of charity than it is a financial charity that we commonly understand. Now, the concept of sadaqah really is even further known as when you give advice. This is a form of sadaqah. When you advise someone, when you give someone their due right of being advised, as Allah tells us in the Quran, وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ in Surah Al-Asr. Amongst the characteristics, the four main characteristics of a believer is that they advise one another in goodness. This is sadaqah. Now, let's focus on the concept of sadaqah in it being a financial act of worship. This is really important because sadaqah in this sense and in its comprehensive sense is really an act that serves to glorify Allah, that we would recognize Allah, and it is a great ibadah, a great act of worship. Amongst the understandings is the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ tells us, as-sadaqatu burhan. What does burhan mean? The Prophet said sadaqah is evidence, it's proof, it's a sign. Sign for what? Proof for what? Evidence for what? It's a sign of one's truthfulness, a sign of one's belief, sound belief. Because by nature, we love wealth. Humans, we love wealth. We want to acquire as much wealth as we can. And some people even make it a lifetime mission to gather as much wealth as they can. And this really is a lack of understanding the purpose of life, because in the end you leave it and someone else inherits it. And this is where the concept of sadaqah falls as a belief that this is wealth that we're entrusted with. Allah has given us this wealth, but we're entrusted with it. We're not the permanent owners. We are temporary owners. The permanent owner is Allah. One of His most beautiful names that denotes and connotes further attributes and qualities is Al-Malik, the sovereign, the owner, the true owner. You and I, our wealth, we're owned by Allah. We're entrusted to use these things that Allah has given us, our body, our soul, the creation generally, the wealth, to give them or to use them in the way that pleases Allah Azza wa Jal, the true owner. Hence we are slaves of Allah. Hence the concept of ubudiyyah, the act of worship. Really, as we said, all of these concepts intertwine in somewhat way together, generally, and specifically have further connotations. So here we understand that sadaqah is evidence of one's true belief, and when they give in the sense of really proving themselves. Allah further tells us in mentioning this as a merit of some of the believers, وَفِي أَمْوَالِهِمْ حَقٌّ لِلسَّائِلِينَ. And indeed, in their wealth, in their possession of wealth, there is a right that they give to those who are needy, those who ask for it. The ones, in other words, who are less fortunate. Allah describes this as a virtue of some of the believers who have fulfilled this concept of giving in the way of Allah. Not only do they give, but they look at it as a right for these people who are less fortunate. And some scholars have said, when you give in charity, don't give as if you are the one who is giving a service or favoring. You're the one who is favored here. No, rather give it as if you really realize that Allah has guided you to what benefits you. Don't think of it that you are the upper hand here, even though the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ tells us that الْيَدُ الْعُلْيَا خَيْرٌ مِنَ الْيَدُ السُّفْلَى, that the upper hand, really when you're giving, it's better for you than receiving. It cultivates us and teaches us that we should be winners. If that is possible, if alhamdulillah the opportunities are there, not to lack in laziness or in lack of potential, but rather when the person is in poverty because of the circumstances, then when we give, don't give in arrogance, give in humbleness, and recognize when you give it as knowing that this is a right that Allah likes to see you giving from the wealth that He's provided for you. And ironically, the more one gives, the more Allah compensates for it. We know that from amongst the most greatest reasons of returning favors, that the favors of Allah Azza wa Jal would be magnified and returned back, as the famous hadith, Ya ibn Adam anfiq unfiq alayk. O son of Adam, the descendant of Adam. This is a call for all mankind that have this belief, the belief in the commands of Allah Azza wa Jal. O sons of Adam, O descendants of Adam, all descendants of Adam, sons and daughters of Adam, anfiq, give in the way of Allah, unfiq alayk. When you do this, I will also provide you. And the provision comes from Allah. All provision, all sustenance comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's initiated from Allah and returns back to Allah. So show Allah the proof of your faith and give in the way of Allah Azza wa Jal. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam further teaches us. He tells us, صَنَائِعُ الْمَعْرُوفِ تَقِي مَصَارِعُ السُّوءِ, that when you do these kind acts, these righteous acts of sadaqah, you give in the way of Allah, what are some of the results? It prevents calamities from falling upon the believer. It prevents some of the hardships that might happen to some people. So the more one gives, it secures them by the will of Allah. This is what the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ tells us, and he is a Sadiq al-Masduq. He is the truthful one who is believed and trusted. So when the Prophet tells us that صَنَائِعُ الْمَعْرُوفِ تَقِي مَصَارِعُ السُّوءِ, the more one does righteousness, and صَنَائِعُ الْمَعْرُوف really is a comprehensive term, and hopefully we might even cover this in another episode. But it means the comprehensiveness of righteousness, ma'roof, good, but one of the greatest ma'roof here that the Prophet is specifying is sadaqah. Because the end of the hadith is where the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ tells us that the people of righteousness who give in the way of Allah in this dunya, they are the ones who will receive the status of righteousness and recognition on the Day of Judgment. So here we have a clear understanding that sadaqah, of course the mandatory zakat, there's no choice here. If one is a believer, the pillar of zakat has to be paid if one accumulates the wealth. As we mentioned, there's a percentage for the wealth, an annual percentage, if it's accumulated over 1 year. And then if it's crops, it's different. The crops have to be given its zakat when the crops are reaped. There's amounts and specificities that belong to the details of zakat, mandatory zakat. But the choice of giving zakat or sadaqah, to be more specific, this gives us a further understanding of how charity, giving in the sake of Allah, with its comprehensive understanding and its specific meaning of giving in the way of Allah, that it is proof for your iman. It's proof for one's love for Allah Azza wa Jal, and it's proof that I can display or suppress the love that we naturally have for the wealth for the sake of Allah. For the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal, because my love for Allah is greater than the wealth of this dunya. And how many of the companions displayed their greatest moments in giving, as Abu Bakr when he came. Of course, Umar came before, and he gave half of his wealth for the sake of Allah. And the Prophet ﷺ asked Umar, what did you leave for your family? He said, I left half of my wealth. Half for Allah, and the other half for my family. And then Abu Bakr came, and he gave everything, his entire wealth, for the sake of Allah. And the Prophet said, what did you leave for your family? And Abu Bakr said, I left for my family Allah and His Messenger. And this is where Umar recognized, he said, I will never compete with Abu Bakr again. I knew that Abu Bakr is on this level that is greater than any of us after the prophets and the messengers. I ask Allah Azza wa Jal to give us the love for him that all other love for wealth or any other things would not be compared. And this is really a command, and it's proven through the act of charity, and it's emphasized and further even cultivated and grown better. When one gives, one experiences the greater love that they have for Allah, and Iman increases. I ask Allah Azza wa Jal to benefit us, me, you, of what's been said. Forgive us for our shortcomings, and forgive our sins, what we reveal, what we conceal, minor and major, and to further enlighten us in the ways that please Him. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
I am a Muslim, Islam my deen, Allah my Lord, His word Quran, Muhammad Prophet, praise be upon him. I'm a Muslim for all of time.